Welcome everyone on this rainy day. And if you have not signed in, after it's over with, please do, because that tells us how many people have come and who's a new face and who has been coming all the time. So if you'd please do that, I would appreciate it. Also, Garland has some books in the back, and if you'd like to purchase one, he'll be glad to sign one for you after. I don't think our guest of honor and our speaker needs much introduction. I've always known him as the piano tuner. But he is a writer. My gosh, he's written 7 or 8 books. I couldn't write one. I have a hard time remembering anything. But at any rate, Garland has been a dear friend. He always has the piano tune for the community chorus when we get ready to, even when a string pops and he has to run and get a new string. But
Tennessee.
he is a person that Tryon is made up of numerous people who are different. And I think the reason they're different is because the people that come to Tryon come here because they want to, and they live here because they want to, not because they have to. And they're always happy, and we all are characters. But one of our characters is Garland Goodwin.
Well, when they asked me to talk, I said, well, what do you want me to talk about? And because, I can talk about a lot of things. And there's a lot of things here to talk about in Tryon. So they said, well, why don't we pick 3 people and you talk about them? So I chose Mr. Vining and Mr. Stevens, and whoever I was talking to suggested Ms. Mazzy. Everybody know who they were? Yeah. Or? Yeah, they were. Okay. I'm starting with Seth Vining Sr. And my granddad, T.A. Rippey, took me in and introduced Mr. Vining to me to Mr. Vining, I guess, actually, when I was 10 years old. That's 1940. And so he handed me a composing stick and opened a tray of pretty large type and said, we do this. So I started putting the letters in, and I didn't really notice they were upside down and backwards. I guess I'm dyslexic or something. Anyway, he was kind of impressed, I guess. Anyway, he says, yeah, come on in every Saturday and we'll find something for you to do. And it wasn't long until I was setting up the type for all the big display ads. They had a linotype machine take care of all the little stuff. But we were in the same office with Albert Arledge. Anybody remember him? No. Hub Arledge, his son, took over the business, moved it down to near Ballew's grocery. He was married, and his mother was a Ballew. Anyway, we shared stuff. We shared the paper cutter. We shared a lot of things between the 2 printing services. Well, then Albert was called away to World War II, and by then I was a journeyman printer, or at least thought it was. Mr. Vining thought it was, because I set up all the jobs. I'd put it on a press, run a copy, take it to Mr. Vining, and get his approval, and then I'd run the job off. So I guess I was a journeyman printer. I have the notes to keep me from running rabbits. You know what that is? My grandmother used to say, you take a hound dog in the woods and you'll go a mile, he'll go 5 miles because he's running rabbits, squirrels, or whatever. So this is to keep me from running rabbits. I think I've covered the first 2 things here. Yeah. Oh, Zella would bring little Albert Jr., who was called Hub, as an infant, she'd bring him in, set him on the desk, and I'd give him some furniture to play with. And that's what we call the precise cut wood that would space out from the type to the chase, the form, whatever. I tend to talk shop, and you need to know the kind of words you're used to. Okay, so, yeah. Mr. Vining came to Tryon from Alabama, but he had been a lot of places before that. He was an accomplished newspaperman, printer, everything, before he came to Tryon. So he was no little inexperienced little person when he came here. He already knew how to do things, and he started the Tryon Daily Bulletin in 1928. When he got here, he married Gladys Gibbs, Polk County girl, and they had Seth Jr. and Elizabeth Ann. And when Robert Ripley came to Tryon to see about putting the bulletin in his column, his cartoons, he said, well, having the world's smallest daily newspaper, that's nothing, but supporting a family with it, now that's something. And it really is, because he sent both Seth Jr. and Elizabeth to Duke University. And that wasn't cheap then any more than it is now. So. Carter Brown, everybody knows who Carter Brown was. He came in and bought the first ad in the bulletin, and he kept it going for years. He advertised his Pinecrest Inn. And then the gravelly voiced Ernest Kerhulis would also come in with an ad for his tea house on Lake Lanier and Sunnydale. Am I talking stuff you're familiar with, or do I need to explain this? Okay, everybody knows about them. Well, after he died, Theo Kerhulis, his son, ran the tea house, and Fran and I would go out there on special occasions only. And I commented to one of his boys when he closed it, when Theo died, and his son says, we can't afford it either. Oh, one of the things Mr. Vining would say to me when he was training me, he would say, use your head, Garland. Even a billy goat uses his head. Mr. V gave a printing press and several trays of type to the school when I was in Tryon School. And we bulletin boys would set the type, and I think we put out 2 issues the first year. So that's pretty old news. Oh, Mr. Vining was a founder of the Polk County Historical Association, which used to be in the depot, and we lost that. And I was president for 8 years of the Polk County Historical Association. Okay, everybody heard all that? Want to hear about Mr. Vining? Anybody have any questions about Mr. Vining? Because I knew him quite well and loved him. Do you know who? Did any of you know him?
No.
Yeah, there are some hands. Some people knew Mr. Vining. And a lot of people knew Seth Jr., right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. So he and Boz continued the bulletin when Mr. Vining, well, he turned it over to Seth long before he retired. He didn't wait until he couldn't do it anymore. He turned it over to him because there were a few things he wanted to do. And one of them was founding the Historical Association. How about Clement Stevens, who was mayor of Tryon back in the 40s? Anybody heard of him? There we go. One lone person. No, we got another one there. Well, I went to work for him in the little office was in that little pyramidal building diagonally across from Brock's Cleaners, which wasn't there then. But anyway, the main office of Tryon Builders was in that little building. But the plant was down at the state line on the left where Henson building is now. All of those buildings, that was Tryon Builder Supply when I was working there. So I spent that the summer when I was 16 working down there, and I went down there because I was working in a grocery store. Would have made $17.50 a week, and at the lumber yard I could make $27.50 per week. And so I talked my mother into letting me use the extra $10 to go up to Hendersonville and learn to fly with Oscar Mayer. He's legendary, had the airport up there, and so I soloed before school started in the fall. So that's how I became a pilot. Mr. Stevens, also a magistrate, used to hold court on certain mornings, and so we would kid him about putting the town drunk in jail so he'd have a warm place to sleep over the weekends, you know. But all of you have seen Mayberry, Sheriff, and well, that was a whole lot like Tryon is something like Mayberry, because we had a town drunk and he spent the weekends in jail, so he'd be warm. Mr. Stevens rolled his own cigarettes. He had a Bull Durham sack with a tag on it, and he'd take out the paper and fold it just so, and then he'd dump the tobacco in it. Of course, it went everywhere, on the desk, on the floor, and then he would roll it and light it up and smoke it. And goodness knows he could afford cigarettes, but he preferred to roll his own and mess up the office. Because okay, I drove the White Elephant. The year after I graduated, I went back to work for Tryon Builders to drive the White Elephant. Now that was a tired old dairy truck from Butler's Dairy. They wore it out before Mr. Stevens bought it. And then Hugh Jack, there were a lot of people know him, he cut the body off right behind the driver's seat and built a flat bed for it. And they put overload springs on it, and that way I could haul stuff out to all the jobs. And when I took early retirement, I built a house over here in Holly Hill, and people wondered, how did you know how to build a house? And I said, well, I drove the White Elephant to every contractor's job in Polk County and saw how they did things. And that's how I learned how to build a house. And so I built one. Eva Smith named the truck the White Elephant because it had no grill, the fenders flapped like Dumbo's ears, and Butler's Dairies had already worn the thing out before Mr. Stevens bought it. Eva could outcuss the lumbermen warming by the fire. She would chase them out when their aroma reached her. There were no forklifts then, so I dreaded getting a call from the depot that there was a boxcar on the siding right out there. Right here. In those days, it's covered over by other things now, but they would tell us, there's a boxcar up here for you. So we bring a big truck up here, and we had to unload concrete, 94 pounds, 100-pound sacks of plaster, but we could throw 50-pound sacks of finish lime around like a 5-pound sack of sugar. I mean, that was nothing. Now, a 25-pound sack of anything is a big load for me. Oh, Mr. and Mrs. Stevens love classical music, and I do too. And I was always buying records with my GI money, Air Force money. And so when I came home, I would always spend one night with them playing some of my new records. And we enjoyed that very much. And Mr. Stevens called me from the airport when I lived in San Diego. He said, "This is Clement Stevens from Tryon." Of course, to me, he was always Mr. Stevens. So, have I covered him well enough? Suit you? Does anybody have a comment about Mr. Stevens and Tryon Builders? No? Guess not. Okay. I can move on to Mrs. Mazzanovich. Now, my Aunt Mildred Rippey, everybody know her? Okay. We played piano. She was playing Rachmaninoff Prelude and C-sharp minor and Liszt Liebestrom. And I thought that ought to be fun. So I went down to Spartanburg and bought an old upright piano. And I even helped them take the player out of it. That's what we did right after the war. There were always all these upright pianos available, and the dealers were buying them up. Instead of selling a new piano, they could buy a reconditioned old upright. So I like the sound, because I like Steinway Grand, you know. And so I bought an old upright that had pretty much the similar sound to the Steinway Grand, the good bass. And so I bought this piano, and they hauled it home up here. And so I started playing the piano. And I would do a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And my mother finally says, "You need to take some lessons." So Ms. Massey was 65 years old then, and she walked around to her pupils' houses around Tryon. And so I went to Ethel Hipp's house, who was Mother's friend, and had my lessons there. And Sue Hipps became a radiologist and was very active in Tryon Little Theater. How many remember her? Oh yeah, good. Yeah, she was great. And then Melvin, of course, became organist of the First Baptist Church, and the lessons did well with him. Later, I drove the White Elephant to the studio. Mazzy would follow me out to the truck and continue talks about reincarnation, the value of work, and other bits of philosophy. See, I knew Lawrence Mazzanovich, landscape artist, famous. How many have heard of him? Okay, good. Well, he befriended me, or took an interest in me, and so we had these conversations where I'd listen to him tell me about all these things, and he would follow me out to the truck. Of course, I wanted to get home to supper, but he wanted to tell me just a little bit more. And so that's good, you know. But now Mrs. Massey, I just learned from Louise Arledge Powell, whose son or daughter, I guess it was Mary Kirk, had lessons, and Miss Massey told Louise one day that she put Massey's ashes around this tree, this shrub right outside the front door. And Mike McHugh said, "Well, nobody would have known that if you hadn't, you know, told us about it. So that's where Nazzie's ashes are. I have no idea where hers are. Ms. Massey had me hand letter some 50 programs for a recital in their studio by Eunice Wayman, who used to walk across town to the studio for her lessons. And that earned me a chance to sit in the corner and hear her play. Now, she loved Bach more than anything, and I gave my hand-lettered program to Chris Armbrust to go in the museum he's promising about Eunice Wayman, who, well, when she was in Juilliard, she wanted to go to Curtis, and she applied and couldn't get in. She thought it was racially motivated, but I pointed out that it was a black guy, was given several awards. He attended, given several awards and all that, so it was not racially motivated. When Eunice started playing the piano and singing in nightclubs, she took the stage name of Nina Simone because she knew that her preacher mother would not approve. Kate Wayman is a Methodist minister. So that's how we got Nina Simone. Yeah. And Chris Armbrust had commissioned this statue, which is in the turnaround at the end of Craig Street down there. And we lost the one up by the post office too.
Your sound has gone down.
Speak up.
Oh,
The battery must have died.
well, I need to yell a little louder then, do I?
Yeah.
Okay. I think I can do that. Another of Ms. Massey's pupils was Ray Melton. I went to school with Ray. In the second grade, he conducted the rhythm orchestra with Splendid and Tie and Tails. And yeah, so then later on, in college, he applied for a Fulbright scholarship as Ray Melton, and he didn't get it. So then his professors said, oh, I think I see what the problem is. So they brainstormed a new name for Ray, and he became Galen Kral, Galen Kral. And he applied with that name, got his scholarship, went on to master the oboe, the ill wind which no one blows good. And Ms. Massey just loved to tell these stories about her other pupils. Ms. Massey said she found a certain concert pianist playing boring. Since I always played something for her when I visited, I asked, and she said she found my playing interesting. Very tactful lady. She lived more than 100 years before, I think she made it to 104.
Wow.
And I've come to the end of my notes.
Wow.
Anybody have any questions?
So how did you become a piano tuner? Was that
Oh,
during that period?
Okay, I was interested in, I was always working on pianos. Mine or other people's, they always needed something. So I decided, well, if I'm going to do this, I probably better do it right, So a guy took me as an apprentice, and he took me to regional meetings all around the country, and pretty soon I was able to take the test and qualify to be a registered piano technician. So I belong to the Piano Technicians Guild, but now I'm a senior citizen. I'm on a no dues. My chapter voted to put me on no dues, so I belong, and I can get the journal online, and I don't pay dues. And they're astronomical now, several $100. So, fortunate there, but one of my friends gave me a shirt that says piano tuner. We solve problems you didn't know you had in in ways you would not understand. So maybe I should have worn that shirt that day.
We used to have a piano tuner in Massachusetts, and on his business card it said, "Nobody knows the treble I've seen."
Well, you know, all of the tuners I know have a pretty good sense of humor, but
Yeah.
sometimes it's kind of weird. Are we done? Well, thank you very much.